Good morning, and thank you for bearing with us. I'm sure that stretch is sufficient, and you'll all do just fine for the next hour and a half. Hopefully you can get a little bit of a break after we get done with this panel, but again, thank you for being here. As I was introduced, I'm Nina Collars. I'm an unaffiliated academic who studies military innovation, and it's absolutely my honor to be moderating this panel today on the ground force's role in multi-domain battle. Personally, I look forward to hearing these comments because as an academic who thinks about military innovation, I have my own questions that come to mind. And it's probably most generally summed up in the words of Yogi Berra. In theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, and in practice there is. And so as I move forward in this sort of opening up and trying to unpack what MDB is, I have three general questions that I'm hoping the panel will get to. First, as per General Perkins's comments, MDB is a really, it's a concept, right, and it's a really big one. And so there's a lot of tricks in getting from a concept down into actually what you're supposed to be doing. And so this first phase is about reaching some kind of flexible consensus on what we think MDB is and what it looks like. And thereafter, once we've got that, we should take a page from former CG of TRADOC Don Starry's gospel that we need to lay out very clear steps on how to get from the concept down to application. And so my question in that area to the panel is, how do we get there? What are the steps that need to happen from this concept so we can operationalize such a big notion of MDB? Second is about integration and interoperability. Something like MDB isn't just a little bit about integration. The heart of MDB is about integration. And so one of the things that I worry about is this is actually the central challenge. And it's not just technologically, but it's organizationally and multinationally as we try and think about how to do this with our joint partners. And I would like to echo ASALT executive, her recommendation that we think about modularity and open architectures as one way to get there, but also just in terms of how the services interact with one another. This is a very serious question, and I would like the panel to reflect on what the primary barriers are between the forces when we talk about trying to get multi-domain battle moving forward. And then finally, when I think about something like planning for future innovation and starting from concepts, these are by definition vague notions. And they have to be because we're planning for future, and that's an unknowable outcome. So one of the ways in which militaries do this is they go through exercises and they experiment and they conduct simulations. And so in particular, I think what is now the Joint Warfighting Assessment, Marine Corps' own Sea Dragon 2025. These are ways in which you get new technologies into the hands of operators to see what they can do with them. And so I would like the panel maybe to think about what are some of the strategies for creating robust experimentation simulation processes that can get us from what we hope to achieve to actually being able to do it. In order to answer some of these questions and any questions that you folks have, we have an esteemed group of panelists today, and I'll briefly introduce each one, but their full bios are in your program. We have Dr. Dave Johnson. He joined the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments after 18 years with the RAND Corporation, where he was a principal researcher. His work focuses on military innovation, joint operations, and strategy. Dr. Johnson is also adjunct professor of Georgetown University, where he teaches courses on strategy and military operations. And he's an adjunct scholar at the Modern War Institute at West Point. Dr. Johnson is also author of numerous books and articles, including Fast Tanks and Heavy Bombers, and Learning Large Lessons, Evolving Roles of Ground Power and Air Power. Next on the panel will be Major General Bo Dyess. He's the acting director of the Army's Army's Capability Integration Center. Major General Dyess has a long and distinguished background in force integration and force design at 1st Army, FORSCOM, and in Afghanistan. He subsequently served in ARCIC as the Director of Requirements Integration, followed by duty in the Pentagon as the Director of Force Development on the Army staff. Third in our lineup is Brigadier General Dale Alford. He's assumed the duties of Vice Chief of Naval Research and Commanding Officer, Marine Corps Warfighting Laboratory, the Futures Directorate, Combat Development and Integration in June of 2015. In his previous role, he served as Assistant Division Commander of the 2nd Marine Division at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And then finally, we have Dr. Paul Rogers. He serves as the director of the Tank Automotive Research, Development, and Engineering Command, TARDEC, where he is responsible for providing executive management to deliver advanced technology solutions for the Department of Defense, ground systems, and combat support equipment. As TARDEC director, Dr. Rogers manages a workforce of more than 1,700 engineers, scientists, researchers, and support staff, and sets strategic direction for a full range of investments that affect more than 270 Army systems. I want to thank you personally, each member, for giving your thoughts today, and I look forward to the questions that come from the audience. Thank you. Dr. Johnson.
Can I get the first slide? First slide. Okay. Well, thanks, Nina, and thanks again to AUSA for having me here again. I want to spend a little time stating the context of where I think we find ourselves today, quite frankly, not just in the future. And I think it's important to understand that for the first time since the 1940s, we face competent, well-equipped adversaries in the Pacific and Europe, and they have significant home field advantages, particularly in their evolving capabilities for anti-access and area denial. And right now, we face, particularly in Europe, the prospect of being overmatched. Consequently, as General Perkins and General Perna noted, we need new concepts and capabilities across the joint force. Next slide. So I believe there are three big problems the United States, our joint force, must solve in the future. First, we need credible military capabilities for high-end state actors. And I believe that Russia is our pacing threat right now, as the Chief has talked about. Second, we'd have to remember that we have to be prepared to fight hybrid adversaries with select state capabilities. Think of Hezbollah, Russian separatists, like rockets, anti-tank guided missiles, and man-portable air defenses. Third, we must, and we talk about this, but it's going to be difficult to do in the press of events, maintain the skills we gained over the last 15 years because those problems are proliferating, not going away. And I think it's important to understand that we have significant capability gaps across all the domains in problem one, as the Chief and our other Army leaders have testified. And this is something Bill Hicks and I have talked about fairly recently, but we also need to admit that we could be defeated to understand what we will have to do to succeed. Next slide. So I'm going to spend the rest of my time mainly focusing on the Russians because I think they're the pacing threat. They've been very busy over the last several years correcting deficiencies in their military after wars in Chechnya, Georgia, and ongoing operations in Ukraine and Syria. They've integrated their air defense systems ranging from the Verba manpads to the S-400 air defense system with IFF for their own aircraft flying beneath them that create significant access challenges to our Air Force and Army aviation. Our soldiers will have to worry about Russian fixed-wing aircraft and attack helicopters and unmanned aerial systems. And we should all recall that the last time a U.S. soldier was killed by an aircraft was in April 1953. And our short-range air defenses are not adequate to this challenge, and an Avenger is not going to fill that gap, quite frankly. The Russians have also fielded rocket and conventional artillery with improved conventional thermobaric and nuclear capabilities. We wrote a paper the other day about we are unilaterally divesting ourselves of ICM with no replacement in sight. It is absolutely essential to the kind of target sets of integrated air defenses and long-range fires that we're going to have to attack in the future. They're improving their armor with advanced protective active protection systems and cannon tube launch missiles with ranges out past 5 kilometers that can also attack helicopters. And again, they're operating in their own backyard inside a tough A2AD environment. We've not actually fought this kind of adversary since World War II, and we need to understand that we're outmatched in many capability areas. Next slide. So the Army understands these challenges. You know, the Chief has testified on this. His list about his priorities about how to get after this are shown here. But importantly, although the size of the Army is an issue, there's nothing about size on this list. This is about materiel deficiencies and capability gaps. So to counter these Russian capabilities, we as a government and as an Army and with our industry partners need to start putting the same effort to overmatching state adversaries we've done to regular enemies over the past 15 years. All this is occurring in an evolving budget environment where we'll have to make strong arguments about the utility of land forces, readiness, structure, and modernization, because quite frankly, they'll affect our ability to provide viable policy options to the Commander-in-Chief. But I think, importantly, we have to also highlight the urgency of the situation and admit that we are way behind the power curve. Next chart. So aside from material solutions, we should also look at the roles of our organizations. And quite frankly, the BCT has become the division of when I was a young officer, that it is the only organization that is the focal point of just about everything. So we ought to challenge that assertion in this high-end state-on-state conflict. And should we keep pushing capabilities down to the BCT, or do we need to relook the role of divisions and corps and focus the brigade on the close fight? What key capabilities need to be pooled above brigade as we start to field these capabilities that, quite frankly, I don't believe can be managed at the brigade level? EWS, cyber, SHORAD, fires. Do we need to rethink how we expect our organizations to fight? Beyond the Army, we need new joint concepts for multi-domain fight in contested environments, because few of the conditions, quite frankly, that enabled air-land battle in the 1980s are really relevant today. We're out of position as a CONUS-based force with insufficient forward presence. Space and cyber are key domains, and it may initially fall to forward Army forces to enable air, maritime, and cyber. The tempo of conflict is also accelerating, and Russia can achieve rapid victories in Eastern Europe before Allied forces can respond. Because they have numerical superiority, material overmatch, tactical nuclear weapons, and again, they're operating in their own backyard. Therefore, as during the Cold War, we need concepts for Europe and the Pacific along the lines of the cooperation during the 1980s between the Army and the Air Force enabled by the 31 initiatives. Next chart. So I'll conclude by noting that in our last existential fight against the competent enemy, World War II, we had to fight joint to win. And our poor state of readiness, both in materiel and joint concepts, at the start of that war made learning extremely costly in blood and treasure. The example of the air and ground commanders in this photograph taken in Koblenz, Germany, near the end of World War II, should be instructive. They forged an effective American air-ground team despite enormous institutional barriers, because they had to do so to prevail. We also had, by 1944, fought for and won air supremacy over Europe, which was a critical condition for entering the continent on the ground. Once again, we faced the proposition of competent, well-armed adversaries who want to keep us out. Now we'll have to wrest control of land, air, sea, space, and cyber domains for them. And I believe the Army will play a critical role in this fight that will enable a joint force. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Nina, for moderating the panel, and thank you to AUSA General Ham and General Perna for hosting us here. And I could start out by saying what General Perkins said and pass it on to the next guy, but I won't do that. I could say that I do not want to be in a briefing in which General Perna pushes back from the table and takes his glasses off. But I can say that we have, through experience and through experimentation, determined that we cannot predict the future with certainty. And when I talk about we, I'm talking about the collective humankind we. We and ARCIC, as your future center for the Army, how do we do that? And we do that about thinking clearly about the future. And how do we do that? We do that through a lens of threats, enemies and adversaries, technology, missions that we receive from the Department of Defense, and history and lessons learned. So do we have a capabilities-based future force development strategy, or is it a threat-based? We actually have both. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1989, in which we clearly had a threat-based ability to look at the future and predict the Big Five, which came out of our air-land doctrine, we went into a capabilities base. But I think with the advent of our Russian New Generation Warfare study, which is now going through peer review and being reviewed by senior leaders in the Army, we've seen an emergence of a pacing threat, and I agree with Dave on that point. So what we've done inside TRADOC is we've updated our operating environment, and General Perkins alluded to it, and which we looked at the future of what does the future look like demographically, economically, politically, socially, climatically, to determine what that future operating environment is going to be. What is our threats, enemies, and adversaries? What are they going to look like? While our 11 Army missions that we received from the Department of Defense and the Defense Planning Guidance has not changed, and the nature of war has not changed, it will continue to be bloody and destructive. The character of war is rapidly changing at an alarming pace. Social media, cyber operations, information operations, unmanned aerial vehicles on the battlefield from all sides, continued investment by near-peer adversaries into the next generation of capabilities. You know, when I was on this stage a year ago, I talked about the Big 6+1. And those were at the time, and continue to be, combat vehicle modernization, future vertical lift, advanced protection for both air and ground systems, cyber electromagnetic, robotics and autonomous systems, and mission command enabled network, and soldier performance and squad overmatch as the underlying +1. Since last year, AUSA published an article in which detailed all 7 of those capabilities. The Army has signed and published the Robotics and Autonomous Systems Strategy, and the Army has adopted the moniker of the Big 6+1. So what does that have to do with multi-domain battle? From thinking about the future, learning from our Russian New Generation Warfare study, analyzing how old technology could be used in new ways or how new technology can be used in new ways. This forms the basis of our thinking about the multi-domain battlefield of the future. And what is that battlefield going to look like? What we've put forward in the white paper is really 4 things. The first thing is going to be, we're going to be contested in all domains: air, sea, ground, cyber, and space. The second thing is that the future battlefield will be increasingly lethal. And you've seen the testimony in which we said we're outgunned, outdistanced, outranged, both in capability and capacity in a lot of ways. That future battlefield will be complex, and that includes dense urban environments. And I've sat through a lot of the Army Requirements Oversight Councils in which the Chief of Staff of the Army asks, how is this system going to work in a dense urban megacity? And we're going to have to fight degraded, because we believe, since we're going to be contested in all those domains, that's where leader development and training come in, as General Perkins alluded to in his part of the discussion. So I wanted to give you 4 key points for the multi-domain battle. The first point is, what is the problem that we're attempting to address here? And I think that's so critically important, because a lot of times we'll be sitting around and a senior leader will ask, well, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? And so I'm going to give you the problem that we're trying to solve in multi-domain battle. That is, U.S. ground forces, combat forces operating as part of a joint inter-organizational and multinational team are not sufficiently trained, organized, equipped, or postured to deter or defeat highly capable peer enemies to win in future war. That's our problem statement, ladies and gentlemen. Now, when General Perkins mentioned the Army warfighting challenges, those are 20 first-order problems that we've determined in TRADOC that the solutions to which would make the Army better. And realistically, we've combined number 2 and number 3 into security force assistant, and number 17 and 18 into integrate and deliver fires. So there's really 18 of the original 20, but you can find tied all 20 in there. The second point I want to leave you with is that multi-domain battle is a joint effort. So this white paper that General Perkins discussed describes Army and Marine Corps approach to conducting ground operations in the 2025 to 2040 timeframe. This will allow the joint force to evolve from interdependence to true integration so as to present the enemy with multiple dilemmas. And that ties back to our operating concept that we wrote in October of 2014. The multi-domain battle is an evolution, not a revolution. It's a natural evolution in combined arms designed to meet the challenges of the 21st century. And this white paper on multi-domain battle, it's a point of departure. What we have now, we have doctrine. Doctrine is what we can do right now as a force. Concepts are a point in the future. If you connect those two, it gives us a direction of movement. So this multi-domain white paper is just the point of departure. It's a starting point for a multi-domain battle discussion. It will lead our experimentations and concept development, and as we look towards a future force. Part of it will be material, and I know many of you are interested in what the material part is, but it informs many other parts. And I'll go over just a few things that we're doing right now. In doctrine, we're incorporating aspects of multi-domain battle into our ADP 3.0 operations. In organizations, we are looking at establishing a multi-domain task force in which we would have those capabilities to experiment with as part of this force. Now, when you're looking at design of an organization, what things need to be organic that are key, that belong to that unit, and what things can be task organized. USAPAC is actually helping us a lot with this multi-domain battle task force thinking. In training, our combat training centers are including full spectrum operations, which includes electronic warfare and a lot of the capabilities that we had divested ourselves of previously. And in material, just as a brief one example of counter-UAS, I think it's relatively rudimentary right now. So if you think about that airplane that General Perkins had on his slide that showed the 1914 Verdun, where manned aircraft made their first appearance on the battlefield. The first things that happened in a action, reaction, counteraction, they threw bricks at each other, and then they brought small arms, which went to machine guns and then ground batteries. We're in a very rudimentary brick-throwing stage right now with our counter-UAS effort. There'll be actions that are taken by the enemy that we react to, and there'll be counteractions, and this will go back and forth. And I think this is just one aspect of the future battlefield in which we'll have to determine how we're going to address that. And in leader development, we're integrating things like cyber capabilities into units at our Army Warfighting Assessment or our Joint Warfighting Assessment now out at Fort Bliss. The next one will be in Europe, next to AWA. And I will put a pitch out for at 12 o'clock today, down in the Warriors Corner, there's going to be a discussion of the implementation of the counter-UAS strategy by General McKendrick, who is our Joint Modernization Command. And by the way, we had a change of name. We went from the Brigade Modernization Command to Joint Modernization Command. That will be in the Warriors Corner. Three components of this solution for multi-domain battle as laid out in the white paper. First, we want to establish and create and exploit temporary windows of advantage. We want to restore capability balance and build flexible and resilient formations in the joint force. And third, we need to alter our force posture to enhance deterrence, because if we enhance deterrence and deterrence works, we won't actually have to be in that war in which we envision. We all make assumptions as substitutes for fact when we're doing the planning process. It is right and proper that we question those assumptions as we look towards the future. And I'll give you just one example. On Tuesday, about a month ago, General McMaster was informed that he was going to interview with the President to be the National Security Advisor. On Saturday, he did the interview. On Sunday, he was selected, and Monday, he was gone. So those assumptions that we had made at the offsite that we held on Wednesday, in which he announced that his last day in ARCIC was going to be the 8th of October, now proved to be invalid. And we needed to come up with another plan. And so that's what we did. And but the point is, question our assumptions. The assumption that we're going to have air supremacy and air superiority may not be valid. There's other assumptions that underpin a lot of the thinking that we've used to develop our force over the last 50 years may not be valid as we look toward the 21st century. So I look forward to your questions, and I'll pass it off to Dale Alford, my partner in the Marine Corps up at Masitic.
Thank you, sir. Thanks. Start off with thank you for having me here. I think I'm probably the only Marine in the room, but I'm pretty comfortable. I've served for 3 great soldiers during this last 15 years, this war, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's good to be with the greatest army in the world. They asked me to talk about 2 questions: how the Marine Corps is thinking about future war, and then how the Marine Corps would integrate our force and our capabilities in joint operations. So when I take those 2, I think back over the last 15 years, and we still got Marines in Iraq. Hell, my son's in Iraq, in Western Iraq, in Al-Assad right now, Marine Sergeant. We got a few Marines in Iraq, a few in Afghanistan, and a few in Syria as we speak today. But really this time, over the last year and a half in particular, the Marine Corps has been treating this period as the interwar periods, like the 20s and 30s. And we're trying to we're coming out of a war and look to the future and what that holds. So we spent a lot of time over the last year and a half looking at that future operating environment. And then we spent about a year writing what we call the MOC, the Marine Operating Concept. And the Marine Corps is a concept-based force. That's the way we do our procurement, our organization, our training, and our equipment off of concepts. We don't have doctrine, really. And we have FMFM1 or MCDP1, Marine Corps Doctrinal Publications, Warfighting, but that's really not doctrine. It's really philosophy. But we do all of our exercises, our experiments, and our war game off of this concept that we developed this past year. From there, I was tasked by the Commandant. I spent about a year redesigning the Marine Corps, and we called it Marine Corps Force 2025. The entire Marine Corps was involved across the force developing this. And then from there, we developed a 10-year plan for experimentation, war gaming, and exercises. And we really do look at every exercise as both a mission rehearsal and an experiment. And that's called Sea Dragon 2025 that we mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. So when General Neller took over, he laid one of his first comments was, "I don't believe the Marine Corps is organized, trained, and equipped to fight in this future operating environment. We're not ready to fight in the urban littorals and the mega cities like we spoke of, which most will be along the coastline. We're not ready for the 5-domain fight. The battles for signatures doesn't look good for us right now. Technology is spreading across the world and down at every level of society. And then information as a weapon was kind of the 5 pillars he laid out for us to look at. We looked at ourselves and the way that we've been moving forward in the last few years, that the paradigm change is that we're following industry on many of this stuff. In the past, the government and the military industry kind of followed us. But we recognize that it's a new way of doing business. That if everything that we do on a regular basis, if it's not contributing to our lethality, then we're probably wasting our time and our money. So when we're talking to industry, that's important to the Marine Corps. So as I shift, I think about if we don't adapt, if we don't change to those 5 domains, then we're going to get defeated. So therefore, we must be a force in transition in the next few years and be ready to fight today, because that's what the Marine Corps does for the nation. I mean, we think of ourselves as the nation's firefighters. We're forward deployed. We're the force that gives the leadership time and space to make decisions. At all times, we have 2 Marine Expeditionary Units out forward, one in the Pacific and one in Central Command. And because of our lack of amphibious shipping over the last 30 years, we have 2 special purpose MAGTAFs, Marine Air Ground Task Force. One that looks to northern Africa and the other one that's in Iraq and Syria. right now. So that's our forward deployed footprint that allows us to be those firefighters for the nation. If need be, we can kick in the door, but most importantly, we kick it in and we hold it open for, like I said earlier, the greatest army in the world to come in and crush the enemy. And that's how we contribute to the joint force. That's how we should contribute. Sometimes Marines are a little paranoid about that, right? That we believe that we got to be the Army and the Navy and the Air Force all in one. But really, what the Marine Corps does and what we're focused on now is how we really do fit into the joint force for our nation. We have to straddle that space between sea power and land power. Our advantage is that our efforts at sea, at float, have to be directly focused on the effects ashore for that period of time until the big army comes in for the big fight. So that's what we're trying to do with our MOC, our Marine Corps Operating Concept. We're trying to figure out how we really do fit in, how we fit in best, and how we help the nation best. We're working with all services, writing concepts. We're writing MDB with y'all in the Army. We're doing a SOF I3 concept that we're writing and will be signed by the fall. We're working with the Navy. We just signed Littoral Ops and Contested Environment. Our Commandant and CNO just signed, Loki. And then very soon we'll have signed our EABO, which is Expeditionary Based Advanced Based Ops. Kind of back to the future, if you think about it. And it's really focused on fighting for sea control, which is different for us than we're used to fighting. Sometimes we're going to be going ashore in order to fire back out into the sea to help the Navy with keeping straits and so forth open. So that's kind of how we're fitting into the joint force and what we're doing. The last thing I'd like to say is, as we talk a lot about this third offset, in the Marine Corps, as I hear the Army you're talking about as well, but for us, the individual Marine and small unit leaders is the most important thing that we do. That's our niche. And I would say that over the last 15 years, we've been in a fair fight at that level, and we got to fix that. One of the greatest books that talks exclusively about that is General Scales' book, Scales on War. How do we change the fair fight? Maybe that's the third offset. When the individual soldier, Marine, or soft operator comes up against our enemy, that we crush them, that we're overmatched, that we're that much better than they are, because that is not the case as we sit here today. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel. I've been asked to talk about two aspects today. One is operationalizing S&T, so I appreciate the question that came up earlier, and I have my definition or my description of operationalizing S&T. And then the second one is the use of experimentation, modeling, and simulation to drive a path forward in support of the multi-domain battle. So those are the two themes that I would like to talk to. So if we can go to the first slide, and this is not meant to be a slide that's readable, so I've successfully achieved that, I think. But what it does do is it reflects a broad and growing knowledge base that's coming out of our TRADOC partners. That's where they are studying and thinking about this future fight. They have recently published in February 5 new warfighting functional concepts and their updates to the existing concepts. And I encourage all of you to continue to be students of your profession, download those documents and go through them. They're very well constructed documents that help us think about multi-domain battle and what's coming. Movement and maneuver support, intelligence, fires are just some of them that they are currently developing. And then we already heard about the robotics and autonomy strategy. So what we've done within our organization, I represent TARDEC, but I'm part of the research and development community, and I'm part of the TACOM LCMC community. We have developed a cohort, and it's a group of motivated individuals, all volunteers, and we have given them the task of reading and studying and understanding the documents, the doctrine, the concepts that are being developed within TRADOC. Their goal is to understand those documents and the thinking coming out of our user community as well as the authors of those documents. And we've used this cohort to drive the development of a 30-year investment strategy for ground investments, particularly in the S&T community. We first published our first strategy almost 4 years ago now. We then revisited 18 months later with another cohort that again was chartered with studying and understanding the documents that were coming out of TRADOC and the latest and greatest ideas of where we are going. We're in the process of setting up a third, and after each cycle, we republish our strategy and reestablish our strategy to ensure that we are aligned with the thinking of the Army. Our third cohort will be forming soon, and it will be focused on the latest warfighting functional concepts that are being developed, and it will be focused on the multi-domain battle. It's critical as we start to lay out our S&T strategy, if we want to operationalize what we're doing, we must first understand the Army's doctrine and advanced concepts and where it's going in support of the multi-domain battle. In parallel to that, and we're pretty good at this, it's projecting technologies, and it's projecting where physics will take us over time and laying out where energy storage is going to be, laying out where the directed energy technologies are taking us, laying out where powertrain, transmission, engines. We are very good at laying out those paths, and we are boxed in by physics. So it's strange turns generally don't turn up. So as we lay out technologies and where it's going over time, and if we lay out successfully what the Army is thinking about multi-domain battle and where it's going, as we bring those two things together over time, we can operationalize our S&T investment to ensure that we're developing warfighting capability that supports the warfighting concepts and doctrine that are being developed. So to me, operationalizing S&T is those necessary two functions, projecting technologies and then projecting our warfighting concepts and doctrine and bringing those two things together. That is operationalizing. And then collecting that into a document which we call our 30-year strategy, but then conveys and translates that body of knowledge to each and every individual within our organization so that they are free to take the initiative and make the necessary decisions in their day-to-day activities in developing the technologies. And they can do it in alignment with where we are going over time. So that, to me, is operationalizing S&T, and I think it's a critical part of our function and our relationship with the TRADOC community to bring those two worlds together so that we are developing meaningful capabilities, warfighting capabilities, when the Army needs it in order to realize the attributes of multi-domain battle. What I've added, so what really was reflected on this chart are those documents and the thinking and the body of knowledge that's coming out of our TRADOC community and our broader user community to include the COCOM participation. That, to be a student of our profession, you must understand where they are going and where their priorities are. But then I also, at the bottom of this chart, I show a picture. Now this is a picture where we've defined an urban environment. I fundamentally believe that regardless of opponent today, we will be able to eventually overcome their A2AD. We will eventually be able to overcome their organized resistance, but at the end of the day, I believe this is where we will always end up. They will always melt back into that environment that tends to equalize our advantage. And when they do that, we need to be prepared to fight and win in that environment. So as we talk about 5 domains, that's important. As we talk about the many different climatic conditions we can be fighting in, from desert to Arctic to jungle to woodlands, we also have to realize that eventually we will always end up into a very complex environment, as we've seen here. We've seen it in every major war in the last century or more. So we need to expect it. So as we start to look at operationalizing S&T, we can't just get focused on those big, lofty boilerplates that we see on PowerPoint. We have to be grounded in the reality of this environment and where we are going to end up fighting at the end of the day. So next slide. So that's the operationalizing S&T. So now I want to focus a little bit more now on experimentation and the modeling and simulation that we've been doing over the last 15 months or so. And I'll just walk you through some of these charts and then try to bring it all together at the end, some of these pictures. So up in the upper left, your upper left, you see a couple groups of soldiers. You see them in a classroom environment. This is part of something we started about 4 years ago also, and these are soldier innovation workshops. And what we have done is we've reached out to the different divisions to bring in soldiers. And when I say soldiers, it's really the E5 to E7 is where we're targeting. Because we not only want a soldier, but we want somebody who leads the soldiers that have to fight the systems we're developing. So we've brought in these groups of folks, and we've had it from the 82nd Airborne, we've had it from 3rd ACR, from 1st Cav, we brought them in from the Ordnance Schools, we brought in many different groups, and I think we're on our 7th or 8th Soldier Innovation Workshop, but we give them a challenge, and we'll give them a challenge statement. How would you develop or design the future fighting vehicle? What are the attributes of that system you'd like to see? And we pair them up with creative designers from an industrial design college that we have in Detroit. So the soldiers are describing real-time the attributes of the future systems they'd like to see. And those college students, they're more artists than they are technical, but they can real-time draw exactly what you're describing. And by the time you get done talking, they turn the picture around and say, is this what you're describing? And then you watch them go back and forth. Out of a 2.5-day workshop with 12 NCOs and 15 to 20 design students, we will get close to 300 advanced concepts. And we will capture them. And that's what you see behind the NCO in the picture, these design drawings that are captured up on the wall. And this is driven by the NCOs. They very quickly take control, they drive the workshop, they run the workshop, and it's their outbrief that we get after 2.5 days. So it's really a great way of us to grab innovation from the soldier and bring it into our technology developments. From that, if you just step down in my picture, we then build our advanced concepts, our future capabilities, as we start to look at what they're describing and what they would like to see. And their ideas, I've heard criticisms levied at this process saying, well, they're tactical, they're constrained by their experiences. I'll tell you, that's not been my experience with them. Some of these folks are very forward-thinking. Some of them are very innovative, and they're very strategic in their approach to the challenge question we've had. So we get a broad swath of ideas from them, anywhere from a very tactically focused solution to a very strategic solution. And they talk about how that would change their battle and how that would change their daily functions. So they are very good at it. So those ideas we are leveraging not only in our more near-term advancements and changes to current vehicles, but we're also looking for their future vehicle systems, and they're coming out of it. And then when you get down to the bottom corner on the left-hand side of this slide, we get into the virtual gaming environment. And again, this is a collaboration with TARDEC, ARCIC. They have a virtual battle space gaming environment that they've been developing over the last few years, and we've been leveraging that to introduce advanced capabilities to soldiers. And what it gives us is a first-person gaming environment where the soldier can actually fight a future vehicle system that doesn't physically exist today. And they can fight against soldiers who are fighting the red systems. So what it gives us is this force-on-force, if you will, personal gaming environment where we can evaluate the team success, the technology success, the vehicle success, and we can draw out engineering conclusions or we can draw out the doctrinal operational conclusions from that environment. So we've used it a number of times. Most recently, we used it to evaluate some of the mobile protected firepower concepts, and we used soldiers from the 10th Mountain and the 82nd Airborne Division in that gaming environment. They were part of a workshop. They described what they would want out of an MPF system, mobile protected firepower system. We had industry build 3 virtual concepts. We then fed that back into this gaming environment where we had the same soldiers fight those systems over a week-long exercise. So what I wanted to highlight here is that there's a great deal of capability that exists within our institution that we can start leveraging for the benefits of multi-domain battle. And then the other pictures just highlight some of the environments we've tested in the last 12 months. We've had engineers with industry solutions up in the Arctic, up in Alaska. We've had engineers with industry solutions in the Jungle Warfare Training Center in Hawaii. We've also been out at Fort Bliss, and we've been a number of other locations to include Bragg and Fort Benning, and we are looking at those types of environments for evaluating technologies. So the last point I'd like to highlight here, and I'm running out of time, is really that we have resources available to look at technologies and capabilities in a multi-domain environment. However, I recently read a book called Army at Dawn. If anybody has read that, it's a phenomenal book. It's about the North Africa campaign in World War II, and it really highlights, it gets beyond just the details and facts of what happened. It really talked about the growing of our Army and the realization from a leadership perspective, a logistical perspective, tactical perspective, and the growing of the soldiers involved into that period of having to hate your enemy enough to kill them, right? And it walks through that, and it's phenomenal. And I will really tell you, as we start to talk about multi-domain battle, the area that concerns me most is not necessarily the tactical fight, but it's our ability to logistically support and sustain over vast distances and over long periods of time when our logistical support can be attrited either by kinetic operations or it can be disrupted by the cyber and communications operations working against us. And if we want to have decentralized, independent action of our combat forces, we have to figure out how to protect and assure that logistical resupply in a near-peer fight. And I think that is my biggest concern. So we need to start looking at these gaming tools and our experimentation and figure out how we can use that to really stress our systems to failure in an environment that would replicate a North Africa campaign. Thank you.
All right, gentlemen, I'll work from the table here. We've got more than a small pile of questions here, and I'll do my best to collect them and make sure that everyone gets some degree of their question answered. We have about 30 minutes, so this is good. As I ask these questions, I would encourage the panelists, if you don't have any specific answers to it, sort of punt to the other specialists. And I'll start, I think, because we ended in a space where we can talk about making technology meet the force and making the force fit the battle. And so this is actually a quite specific question, but I think at least leaving off with Dr. Rogers and Dr. Johnson, it says, given the expected conditions of the emerging operational environment, does the multi-domain battle concept accelerate the obsolescence of the BCT formations? And in particular, I think this person is pointing to the fact that we're trying to, it says that the draft functional concept for the movement and maneuver that the BCT will remain the Army's primary tactical formation until 2040, or will the adversaries allow us 27 years to design and build an MDB formation? And so to whatever aspect any of you would like to speak to this, I'd love to hear the answers.
I guess I'll start. I think I address it slightly in my discussion. What is organic to a formation and what is task organized? And I think that is something that we'll look at when General Perkins was talking about the effects that occur in the close, deep, and rear framework of the battlefield that come from other parts, perhaps, of the world. And then how do you describe that? So when we had, I always thought it was unfair for to have a exercise or an experiment at Fort Bliss, and you'd have a national cyber attack capability essentially unloosed on the brigade combat team in the box. And so this last iteration, what we did, we brought some people from Fort Gordon who were national defense capabilities, and we essentially amended the TOC and had an extra station in there for a Chief Warrant Officer 4 and 5 to work to identify where cyber attacks were coming from. We identified a machine that was acting strangely in the cyber realm. We isolated it from the rest of the network, and then the brigade commander was like, hey, you've got to get that capability back in the fight because I need it to conduct my operations. So to answer your question, I think that we'll be doing experimentation on does that chief warrant officer who came from Fort Gordon, is he now we're gonna have one of those in every formation, organic, or are they gonna be task organized? And there's pluses and minuses for each one. If they're organic, they train together on a daily basis, they know each other. If it's task organized, you're able to concentrate training and leader development at special skills levels at a higher level, and then allocate to formations as required. So there's pluses and minuses to both of those. I think that is just one brief example of what we'll be looking at in a multi-domain battle environment in others.
Yeah. So the Marine Corps is looking at this question in particular very hard. I mean, the Army is an organization of brigades now, and we're an organization of battalions and squadrons. But our concepts and what we've been working on is, what is the unit of measure? Is it the company? Can we fight in a more distributed manner? Can we do multiple penetration points from the sea and then aggregate quickly? Or do you need to aggregate if you can bring fires and effects from different parts of the world? So we are struggling with that now. There's a big group in the Marine Corps that says never ever below the battalion, right? So, and some of the younger Marines don't believe that we can fight in a much more disaggregated manner. So I think that's the gist of the question that was asked.
Yeah.
So I guess, the thing I'd raise is, what was the problem the BCT was designed to solve? It was not high-intensity state-on-state pure warfare. It was rotational readiness for protracted conflicts where divisions couldn't be disaggregated effectively to deploy over and over and over again. And ARCIC became a piece of that because of the duration of the conflict. So the question we have to ask now is, what is the problem our formations are going to solve in the future? And I think the last time we really had this discussion was in the early 80s with Airland Battle, where we said, there's things that a division really can't do very well if it's going to be setting up conditions for battles from smaller formations. So you need a core, and there's all these assets that are in theater that you're going to have low density of, that when you ever want to have in reserve, just like we had in World War II with the way we pooled assets at core, Leslie McNair's brainchild. So the question is not so much what is the formation going to do, but what is the problem the formation's got to solve? And I think we are pushing more and more and more to the brigade because that's what we're used to. The brigade's been a ground-only formation that give it whatever it needs for that, and it became a fixed formation where everything's organic. As an infantryman and an artilleryman, I just worry about having essentially no division or corps level artillery that can affect the fight across the theater. And when you get into the question of, what is the fire support needed for a brigade, you get to short-range cannon artillery. When you get to the discussion of what is needed for the defeat of integrated air defenses, long-range fires, that gets to a question of someone who's managing the long-range fight across the theater again. So I think the question we need to bring ourselves back to, that we eventually get to when we finally get down to it, is what is the problem our formation is going to fight, and how do we best optimize what we have and task organize around that?
And I'd just like to start addressing that question by referring back to the movement and maneuver warfighting functional concept that was just published in February. It really talks about the need for units to operate in a decentralized, distributed, and semi-independent fashion. And part of that is driven by a potential near-peer threat who can bring long-range fires upon any centralized or large gathering of capability, whether it's supplies or units. So it's driving us to this belief that we have to be decentralized and distributed and semi-independent. So as we start to go down that path, And it's over extended distances and extended period of time. And in there they call out that, the kind of 3-day supply that you plan on now, we need to start planning on carrying a 7-day supply. So when you start looking at the mounds of capability, mounds of resources you'd have to take with you, 7 days of supply, and then you start talking about the refueling requirement for a heavy brigade. Some of those things don't seem to balance as you work through it. So I don't know if this will accelerate the obsolescence of the BCT, but I think we have some, if our assumptions of the multi-domain battlefield are correct, we have some stressing conditions that we really have to study and figure out, again, logistically, how do you support a distributed, decentralized organization, and how do you prevent units from culminating because of a lack of fuel or a lack of ammunition. So those are some difficult challenges that we really have to study, which goes back to my ending point when I was talking, is that we need to leverage experimentation, whether it's virtual or live, and stress our ability to support and sustain, not just focus on the war-fighting end of it, but we need to stress our logistics chain and our sustainment chain.
Thank you. So moving from what is a localized Army question, we're going to step back one, and there are two questions here, and they're sort of pointing to the same thing, so I'll just sort of summarize. Are we appropriately synchronized and integrated at the joint level to assure that all the services are building toward this joint future force? And then similarly, a question asks, what ideas do other services bring to Army? So what's the contribution to the joint force to this conversation, or will this remain, as maybe some have critiqued, a parochial issue?
Well, I'll start with recalling in General Perkins' discussion, which we define stovepipes, and we optimize inside of the stovepipes. And when we're at a point that we're at right now, I think we realize that there's a need for change, and there's a need at the beginning to define the concepts together. And we strong tie with the Marine Corps. Obviously, we're both ground services. We get there slightly differently. We have a slightly different duration on the battlefield. However, there are similar required capabilities between the Army and the Marine Corps. I am heartened by the fact that the Air Force has expressed an interest in coming into the discussion as well, because this is, as we talked about at last fall's AUSA, with the Undersecretary of the Navy, the future Chief of the Air Force, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, the Undersecretary of Defense, and General Perkins, that this has got to be a joint fight from the beginning, and now is the time. And there is some urgency to this. That we cannot afford as a nation to wait 10 years to develop this concept. And as you know, it takes, as Ms. Easter said, sometimes it takes 8-10 years to develop a capability that's going to be fielded to the force. So there's some urgency to this work, and working with the Marine Corps and the Air Force, I think, is very important for us. And anything, Dale?
For the Marine Corps to survive, we have to be a joint force. I mean, both procurement, and the way we fight, and everything. So I think over the last few years, the relationship between ARCIC and McCITIC has been an important come together that we didn't have before. So we're heading in the right direction anyway.
So I'd say that one of the things we have to remember is what we don't know and what we've forgotten. We have not actually had to fight joint rotating aircraft at 20,000 feet, dropping JDAMs is not a joint air campaign. And I think what we've forgotten is we're going to be in a condition where there's going to be a scarcity of resources in the initial entry piece. If you talk to so this is not an enabling function anymore, this is a requirement. If we do not take out integrated air defenses over Eastern Europe, we will not have air. The only way you can take those integrated air defense systems out is potentially cyber or with long-range fires. We do not have the long-range fire capability to address that issue at this point, and it's going to have to be forward forces that take away the ability to deny us air superiority in the early part of the fight. That is not joint interdependence. It's not, joint concept. It is, I can't survive without you, and how do we figure this out? And we've got a big gap in the last 15 to 20 years of not having to think about this. And junior air officers and junior Army officers, junior being up to grade of colonel, have never really pondered this problem in a way of how do I solve it so I can get to Normandy and not find myself instead in Dieppe, quite frankly.
Good. Okay. All right. So, and for our industry partners who are in the room, I'll get to some of those more directed questions. I want to step back one lens further because I think this is an even bigger question. This is directed first to General Dyess and General Alford. Can you comment on the multinational aspects of the evolving MDB concept? Can our key allies and likely coalition partners keep pace with us in this demanding and fast-evolving area?
Well, when we did the Army warfighting assessment out at Fort Bliss, we thought that interoperability was going to be one of the key things that we had to examine out there. And sometimes even in the United States Army, when you have different versions or you have different types of units, you only determine that you cannot talk to each other when you put them side by side. And so in this last rotation, I think, Nina, you were out there where we had a British, Canadian, Australian brigades on the ground, as well as an Italian battalion in Sim from Italy, and some others as well. And so when you put them side by side, you find out that even though we have the same name on the same type of capability, maybe there's a V3 version and we have a V4 version, they can't talk. So General Hodges has been very instrumental in providing some focus to us in this area. He has said, I want to work on three things. I want to work on digital secure or secure voice, digital fires, and a common operating picture. And that's what we've used as focus areas to work together with our allies. So we will not fight on a future battlefield without allies. It will be joint, it will be a coalition, it will be intergovernmental. So I think that having our allies together in experimentation, and this is another thing, is just urgent to do, to find out, hey, what are the things that we can do now? What are the directions that we need to go in, considering that we're going to have national systems. That is just a fact of life. We're going to have national systems. We're going to have U.S. SIPR. We will not share that. They're going to have their own classified. They're going to share that. I've always thought that we should be working on, in training, a coalition classified as our main backbone with NIPR here in the United States. And then when we deploy, it's not let's make up a new thing that we have to start from scratch on every time. So that's my thoughts on interoperability and what we're doing at Fort Bliss and the AWA.
Like you said, we're not going to fight alone. So, I mean, one of the big pieces that I say we need to educate our Marines and soldiers better on fighting with coalition. Each one of the different partner nations bring a different capability and different way of fighting. And you find, we're arrogant many times in talking about our coalition partners, really understanding what they bring to the battlefield, because they're going to be there.
So I'd just like to, being the S&T guy, offer that perspective here. I think maybe it's my blind spot, but when we talk about multi-domain battle, we're talking largely about a near-peer threat. Well, if we're really going to be faced with a near-peer threat, multinational partners, I think, are going to be crucial for us to be successful in that environment. Just to have the ability to stand up to a near-peer threat over the great distances and longer periods of time, you need to have that redundancy, and you need to have those partners who are willing to fight shoulder by shoulder. So I think when I hear multi-domain battle, I'm thinking near-peer, and I'm thinking major combat operations. So that I don't believe it would be smart to try to go it alone. I think multinational is a key aspect of it. I will just comment, the question kind of the thing that popped into my mind when I heard the question read was future combat system. We all remember FCS and the immense amount of treasure we poured into this new way of fighting, network-enabled, all this stuff, all empowered by technologies. I don't think that's what this is all about. It's not a technology, just a revolutionary technology-heavy reframing of the challenge. I think it really is a reframing of that near peer and how do we leverage the technologies, definitely, but I don't think it's going to be this whole technological wave that comes in and changes the Army. I think it's much more of a doctrinal, concepts-based approach.
Okay. All right, so let's move more closely into some industry questions. This one's directed to General Dyess, but anyone on the panel is open to. How should industry partners view MDB concepts as they look to direct their investments? Can TRADOC break down MDB into subordinate concepts and components to assist industry in focusing their efforts?
So we have broken that down into the start of the functional concepts. That's the first. They're rolling off of the Army operating concept that we published in 2014, but obviously over this past year and a half, heavily influenced by our Russian New Generation Warfare study, where we looked at the gaps. And there may not be a lot of additional gaps, but gaps moved in risk category from one risk category to a higher risk category. I would just say that as we continue to work with industry, and we're going to have a capability information exchange at Fort Eustis in the August timeframe, and we've been asked to delve deeper into what our gaps are, and we're going to put out a FedBizOps announcement in the May-June timeframe that's going to announce this capabilities information exchange. And what we like to do is get into deeper with the individual industries about what our specific gaps are. And so I think this is, we continue to work with the industry to try to inform them about what are the things that the Army sees as required capabilities, and how does that translate into material. But since it's going to be open to everybody, we've got to determine how to have a session like this with multiple industry partners in the room, but also have a discussion one-on-one that's available to everybody so that we're not picking a particular industry. And that way, I think we can work within the boundaries that are established with the federal acquisition regulations, et cetera. We're not buying, TRADOC's not buying things. We are determining what the requirements are. And so this is a common theme from industry, and this is something that we're looking forward to working with them on.
I want to direct this one to General Alford as well as Dr. Rogers, because I think both of you are playing, I think, pretty closely with the stuff on modeling experimentation. And so if you could talk a little bit about how you see modeling and experimentation compressing development times and leading to affordable experimentation.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. So the organization I'm in charge of, we're across the way. Concepts, then a big wargaming division, science and technology, and then experimentation, and then also on the RCO, the Rapid Capabilities Office. So all that put together allows us, theoretically, to be able to produce things faster. I'm not so sure it has in the past. And much of it is we're working is to educate our representatives, in Congress, because much of what we're trying to do, certain laws will have to be changed in order to do it. I'll give you a quick example, and I'll pass it on. And it's a simple one. So we have this vehicle that we built back in 2000. It's called ITV, Internally Transportable Vehicle. It fits inside of an MV-22, and it pulls the EFSS, our Expeditionary Fire Support System, our mortar, our 120 mortar. And we built this thing in order to fit in the back of an MV-22, right? So we could get the thing. Well, it's a horrible vehicle. We paid $285,000 a piece for them, and they don't run. They didn't run. They never ran. Both wheels front and back wheels turn, and the back wheels turn when they're not supposed to turn, right?
We had one that was called the Gamma Goat.
Right. We over-engineered this thing. Well, a year and a half ago, I was tasked with, hey, figure out how to get it fixed. So I took a rifle company out at Fort Hunter Liggett for 6 weeks, and they worked with this vehicle. At the same time, we borrowed 12 M-Razors from SOCOM, gasoline version M-Razor. Of course, all the Marines loved the M-Razor and hated the ITV. It was a monumental task to keep this ITV running. But this M-Razor, all you do is put gas in it and never wash it. And, every redneck in Georgia has one on their farm, and they never do anything to them. So we went to Polaris and told them, hey, we love this vehicle, and we'll buy some if you can make it a diesel, which we didn't, because the Navy hates gasoline on their ships, right? In 3 months, they produced a turbo diesel that runs 70 miles an hour. I mean, it goes too fast, right? We need to figure out how to govern these things. So we went to Congress. Our commandant went to Senator McCain and asked to move $10 million from one program to the next, and we bought 144 of these vehicles, and we're fielding them as we speak. That's not how it should work. But laws have to be changed in order to put money into the rapid capabilities. So when we have a concept, we war game it, we experiment with things, we find things that work. How do you produce that quickly to get it in the hands of the Marines and soldiers out there? We don't have the full answer right now.
So I tend to upset some of my friends back in Warren when I speak to the acquisition process, so I'm doing this at my own peril. But I think accelerating or speeding an acquisition process, to me, it's more about leadership and leadership engaging and driving different behaviors within that process. The process is what it is, and there's great folks who fight through the acquisition requirements, not requirements, but acquisition steps on a daily basis, and they do phenomenal work. So it's not a criticism of them, but it really is being able to frame the question differently and get after things. If an industry solution is good enough, then get after it, buy it, get it out there, and improve it over time, instead of a formal lockstep process to develop and field a new capability. But I do want to say, draw a contrast that exists in my mind. The acquisition process is not synonymous with fielding a capability. So the acquisition process is a portion of it, but on the front end of all of it is what we've been talking about, and that's this requirements process. So an acquisition program starting with bad requirements will end badly. And too often we start with requirements that don't have consensus. There's many different camps throughout the Army as to what right looks like. And depending on who is in power at any given time, those requirements can change significantly, which then sends the acquisition community into the ditch and they get blamed for it. So whatever we can do at the front end to ensure that we have consensus throughout the Army as to what right looks like, what the proper requirements are, and what the non-tradable requirements are, that sets us up to field something faster. So modeling and simulation, the experimentation, the use of prototyping, not within an acquisition program, but prototyping before an acquisition program, is critical to ensure we understand what's in the realm of the possible, what's affordable, and what good enough looks like. So that will accelerate fielding.
We're left with about 3 minutes left, and so I'm going to ask actually a very specific question, and I'll leave it to Dr. Johnson first. Will the Army utilize naval cross-domain fire, Tomahawk, etc., to overcome peer state long-range fires and air defense artillery in order to get to the close fight without being degraded, and how will the BCT commander access this capability?
So we've done a fair amount of work at CSBA on what's called the salvo competition. How do you take on, particularly in the Pacific, targets at range with different surface capabilities? The Army plays a key role in these fights because it is physically on the ground, survivable with deep magazines, and it's not tied to nodes. I think the same thing pertains in Europe as far as how do you go after IADs. But as far as joint fighting, I think we have not seriously thought about, how would we do Desert Storm or OAF again? we do it the same way we did it, because we've not evolved as far as understanding how the joint force fights together. I think for the first time in a long time, as I talked about earlier, we're going to face an adversary that if you don't use all the tools across the joint force, you're not going to be able to succeed. How do you take out IADs so air can operate? Is that a cruise missile problem from naval vessels? Is it Army long-range fires? What are the real gaps we have in addressing that problem? And I guess we're finally back to the place, and the reason I talked about the 31 initiatives I think is so important. The Air Force Chief of Staff and the Army Chief of Staff realized that the problem in NATO presented a problem neither service can solve with its way of fighting. That there need to be a joint perspective about how to attack the echelons, how to deal with this threat that was bigger than any of us could solve independently. I think we're back there without specifics. I don't think the BCT commander is going to leverage maritime fires. I think the BCT commander is going to be involved in fighting T-14s and T-17s and the rest of what he's going to be facing in the battlefield.
All right, that leaves us with about 1 minute left. Would anyone on the panel like to do any parting comments about any questions they have for industry or thoughts that you want our audience to consider as they leave this space?
Well, Nina, I have a question for you. Did we answer any of your questions?
I think in particular, I think that the thinking carefully about the role of experimentation and simulation, I think, with the S&T communities is key to realizing this conversation about what we think we mean by a multi-domain battle. I think that a number of our questions, I think, attempting to poke Army into thinking more clearly about how this is a joint effort, I think is well received, and I think that this panel would wholeheartedly agree that it's not supposed to be an Army effort. And so in that sense, it's encouraging to me to hear the services, or at least the service that's sponsoring the bulk of this animal, opening up and saying this is a whole of DoD effort, in particular with the cyber and the emerging electronic warfare components that traditionally haven't had solid homes anywhere. So I want to, if the audience could give our panel a hand. Thank you very much for your work today, gentlemen.
Thank you, Dr. Collins. Thanks, panel. It's a great job. What a great start.